Hello, in this video we will discuss about the transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide dissociation curve. So the basically here we will discuss about that oxygen transport so we can understand as well with the carbon dioxide also. So the first of all I want to share the introduction first. So the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve is a vital tool for comprehending how blood transport and release oxygen. So how oxygen will be released into the tissue and how oxygen will trap from the lungs into the blood blood red blood cell, for example hemoglobin. So in this way here is the only 2% in the plasma component of blood and 98% oxygen in the protein bound state, for example hemoglobin. So the hemoglobin is very important for the binding with the oxygen. So the oxygen affinity will be with the hemoglobin increase and decrease will lead to dissociation of the oxygen into the tissue and association of the oxygen into the respiratory system. So here is the tetramer of hemoglobin, the structure which that are present in the red blood cell contain a 4 chains, beta and alpha, 2 beta and 2 alpha. Contains central part is the iron and his oxygen will trap to T state. T state mean the higher partial pressure for oxygen to bind with hemoglobin. So the induces the conformation change after the higher pressure to become a lower pressure. But important thing is that the changes of their conformation will lead to trap easily and destabilizes the T state, and this T state will become a R state for basically the low partial pressure for oxygen to binding with higher affinity with the oxygen with hemoglobin, and in this way the oxygen will trap more and increase the ease of the positive cooperativity with the oxygen through a hemoglobin. So the R state with higher affinity in low partial pressure. So the R state with higher affinity in low partial pressure. The low partial pressure but the affinity will be high for the trapping more oxygen. So the first oxygen when trapped, the partial pressure will be more, but when the second oxygen molecule will trap to partial pressure decrease but the affinity of the molecule binding will be increased. So here is the circulatory system. The circulatory system is made up of systemic circulation and pulmonary circulation. This is the double circuit circulatory system in the human, for example, which that contain a lungs, and the lungs is the pulmonary artery and pulmonary vein, and the descending aorta superior and inferior vena cava, which that is deoxygenated blood move toward the superior vena cava and to inferior, and the right atrium to right ventricle, while on the other hand the basically the pulmonary artery which that lead to oxygenation through a air sac of the alveoli of the lungs. So in this way here is the systemic circulation will be occur, and this systemic circulation mean the bathing of the oxygen with the tissue in the tissue. So it will be a dissociation and affinity of the oxygen will be decreased with hemoglobin, while the affinity of the carbon dioxide will increase during the tissue exchange due to the partial pressure changes. And in this way here is the blood which that's contain hemoglobin, and this hemoglobin basically made up of when go and deoxygenated blood will show the blue color while the oxygenated blood show the red color. So in this way here you can see the hemoglobin state, T state. The T state means the deoxygenated relaxed state. So the deoxygenated relaxed state means the deoxygenated relaxed state means the R oxygenated relaxed state. So the T higher partial pressure for oxygen to bind with hemoglobin. So the T is the higher partial pressure, while the R is the low partial pressure for oxygen to bind with hemoglobin. So in this way, the affinity will be decreased or increased, which that is due to the conformation change of the hemoglobin molecule, hemoglobin protein. So in this way, higher partial pressure for oxygen to bind with hemoglobin is T state, and the low partial pressure for oxygen to bind with hemoglobin is basically is the R state. And in this way here is you can see I am drawing the bigger picture for the pulmonary circulation. So this is the air sac which contains T state. T state means the partial pressure in alveolar sac will be high. So the T state. And partial pressure will be high to move the lower partial pressure to the T state. Here is the higher partial pressure. So the higher partial pressure into the blood circulatory system for oxygen. So the oxygen can trap into the hemoglobin, and the affinity of the oxygen trapping will be more into the red blood cell hemoglobin. So in this way the carbon dioxide will be dissociation, because the dissociation will be more. So the affinity with the hemoglobin will be less for carbon dioxide but increase for the oxygen trapping with the hemoglobin in the pulmonary circulation. So in this way here I am drawing the systemic circulation and during the tissue oxygenation during the for Krebs cycle and electron transport chain in the tissue for produce energy. So here is the R state. R state and the hemoglobin, oxyhemoglobin will be moved, the oxygen dissociate because the affinity will be decreased and the move into the blood, tissue for the respiration, and the carbon dioxide affinity will be increased with the hemoglobin, so the trapping of the carbon dioxide with hemoglobin will be more. So this is the important things you should need to understand. And next is we will discuss about the relation between partial pressure of oxygen and the saturation of oxygen. So the saturation means the how many molecules of the oxygen will be trapped in the form of percentage and can be represented by the oxygen dissociation curve. Here we are understanding the oxygen dissociation curve. So here is the horizontally shows that the partial pressure of oxygen, the millimeter of mercury, while the vertical shows that the oxygen saturation. So during the pulmonary circulation, so the partial pressure of oxygen will be decrease partial pressure of the oxygen, but into the air sac will be increased. So in this way you can see that is the T state, and T state means the higher partial pressure for oxygen to bind with hemoglobin. So in this way the higher partial pressure into the blood circulatory system will lead to trap the oxygen. So after the oxygen trapping will rapidly move upward this graph to show the saturation of the oxygen in the 80% during the partial pressure when increase. So the increasing of the partial pressure with the hemoglobin will lead to increase. So the lungs will decrease the partial pressure and again more oxygen will become and our carbon dioxide will increase to exhale. So in this way the cooperativity with oxygen with hemoglobin will be more positive. So in this way here is you can see this the carbon monoxide when trapped with the hemoglobin to tightly bond show the decrease of the hemoglobin oxygen dissociation. So this is the basically that is a problem during the carbon monoxide for smoking as well as other problem. So the next again into the systemic circulation will lead to decrease the partial pressure, the decrease of the saturation, sorry. So after the decreasing of the saturation due to the partial pressure of oxygen will be decreased. So the again decrease in the systemic circulation to lead to increase again into the pulmonary circulation. But important thing is that here is we can also show into the artery and veins. So the veins contain the basically the venous blood is the 30 millimeter of mercury partial pressure, while the arterial blood contain more. So in this way the more partial pressure mean the dissociation will be more, while the venous dissociation will be more, but the arterial blood partial pressure will be increased to affinity with the hemoglobin will be decreased. So in this way you can see the dissociation curve you can understand. But here we will understand the oxygen dissociation curve disturbance. So the Bohr effect is the first, which that is the carbon dioxide when increase, so the pH will be decreased. After the pH will be decreased due to the carbonic acid formation To decrease the oxyhemoglobin, so the oxygen hemoglobin affinity will be decreased due to, and in this way the oxygen will trap into the tissue, and lower pH causes the hemoglobin to release more oxygen. So the oxygen will be released more when the pH will be increased, when sorry pH will be low, acidic, more acidic due to the carbonic acid, due to the increase of the carbon dioxide. So after the carbon dioxide when increase, so the increase of the pH, decrease of the pH, and in this way the hemoglobin dissociation with the hemoglobin oxygen affinity will be decreased. So here is the temperature, for example, increase to the decrease of the affinity with the oxyhemoglobin to more oxygen trapping, and in this way the basically here you can see this is the temperature will be increased, so the oxygenated hemoglobin affinity will be decreased, and as oxyhemoglobin is exposed to higher temperature in metabolizing tissues, affinity decreases and hemoglobin unload oxygen. So on the other hand, the 2,3 diphosphoglycerate is the acid production more when, so the acid as a regulator of the allosteric properties of hemoglobin in the red blood cell. When bind to the hemoglobin, it stabilizes the T state and conformation and decrease the hemoglobin affinity for oxygen. So in this way the affinity with the hemoglobin with oxygen will be decreased. So that is major important, and the affinity will be decreased, so the oxygen move easily into the tissue. So here the saturation of the hemoglobin with the oxygen will be increased when the decrease of the carbon dioxide, while the increase of the carbon dioxide will lead to increase the partial pressure of the oxygen. So this is the basically the transport carbon dioxide and dissociation curve, which that is showing in the figure. I hope you are understanding and enjoy this video.